What am I saying again?
This is MPW.
MPW.
The podcast.
With your host, Xylo Aria.
Cool.
A podcast about music production
For the everyday musician.
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Vanessa Silberman is a New York-based singer-songwriter, producer, engineer, mixer, entrepreneur, and the A&R, as well as the owner of Diamond Heart Production. Diamond Heart Production is an artist development, label, recording, and music publishing company started in 2014 and was named the #1 of 2011's LGBTQIA+ and women-owned labels that are changing the music industry. Hi, Vanessa. It's great to have you on the episode today. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And I am keen to chat to you about touring and organizing your first tour. But before we do that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your career and how did things get started in music for you and how did you get to where you are today in a bit of a summary?
Yeah, sure. I have been in the music business since basically my late teens. I moved to Los Angeles in my late teens. And then, long story short, I started by getting some internships when I was going to music school briefly. And I started working for various labels and doing internships that turned primarily into my first music business job, which was doing what they called at the time viral marketing for Epitaph Records, which is an independent label in Los Angeles. And I've had, since then about every job in the business and simultaneously had been doing music, and I had a band for about 12 years called Diamonds Under Fire, and then a solo career. And then also I started my record label, Diamond Heart Production, in 2014 while I was an assistant engineer, the in-house assistant engineer at Studio 606. And before COVID, while releasing records and also recording, I was touring full-time, playing 100, 200 shows a year. Played something like 800 shows in the span of 4 or 5 years. So yeah, just kind of doing everything from TV and film licensing, royalty stuff in that world to assisting to, doing marketing, booking, touring, recording, just kind of everything. Yeah, and have been doing music and all these things since. So long story short.
Okay. So just a bit of everything, it sounds like.
Yeah, and primarily when I was working in the business and, did all these various jobs, I had started my label because I was scouting for a lot of other managers or labels at the time. And, and kind of, I guess, in the pop realm or pop world, everybody's kind of jumping in to be second, usually in the major label world. And I remember finding all these really cool bands and artists and, telling people about them. And I was like, you know what? I've seen all these different artists who I found and felt like I had a pulse on. And then a few years later got really big. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to start a label. And I had wanted to do it since I was super young. I'm going to start a label as an outlet for myself and all these other artists so I can help them. One of the classes that really inspired me when I was in music school was artist development. And I really loved doing everything. And, early on, I kind of remember, some other people in the business telling me, Vanessa, you kind of have to pick one thing. And it just didn't make sense to me. And I felt like the more knowledge and things and power that artists have is empowering themselves and knowing how to, I guess, bring their dreams and vision to fruition and helping themselves. That's their best asset. And I really have loved and enjoyed helping artists in the artist development realm, which also a huge part of that is touring and building that way if you're a band.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great and a good thing for artists to be aware of as well. So can you tell me, Vanessa, one event in your life that if you could, you would change?
To be honest, I feel like I wouldn't change anything because most of the time people would want to change like their more difficult or challenging experiences. But I feel like those challenging experiences or hard points make us into who we are and give us strength and lessons. And I think I wouldn't take anything back. I think all the experiences we have are part of our journey.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. And if it wasn't for those challenges, we wouldn't be who we are today. So glad you're on the same page. So, can you tell me a random fact about yourself that perhaps not that many people in the industry know about you?
When I was growing up, I grew up partly on Kauai, Hawaii, the island of Kauai. And growing up, I didn't have MTV or the radio for that matter. And really, I discovered a lot of music stuff through like Columbia House, 10 CDs for a penny, kind of ordering random stuff or watching MTV at like friends' places. And yeah, so I had a very different experience growing up. I discovered music very differently versus like, obviously we didn't have, social media like TikTok and Instagram, but Kauai was, I think the whole state was an early adapter of the internet. So I discovered, I think, early on downloading music. One song would take like 24 hours. I remember, hopefully I won't get in trouble for this. Someone had uploaded like all this old rare like Nirvana songs that hadn't come out. And I remember discovering this page. And at the time, it taking like a whole day, a whole day and a night to download one song. And I would take a tape recorder and a microphone and try and record it on the tape so it wasn't stuck on the computer and I could have it on a tape. So I think just having, the unique experience of living in Hawaii, was really different. I mean, it took maybe a half hour to get to the closest gas station kind of situation.
Wow. Okay. Wow, that must have been a different lifestyle than what most people can imagine. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. So jumping into our topic today, which is planning your first tour, can you tell me, Vanessa, when do you feel is the right time for an artist to start their touring career, say?
I think there's a wide variety of answers there, especially now with technology, and it depends on the artist and band. Traditionally, artists or bands, back in the day when they did tons of artist development and the labels had like these really big budgets, you would make a record and take the show on the road and build that way, where it was way more of a common thing than back then. I think it was way more unique and substantial. I think, if we think back to like the Motown days and stuff like that, nowadays, I think for a rock band particularly, most of your career is built off of performing live. And there's a lot of, I think, different perspectives or arguments on this, whereas a pop act, you can build a lot more online. But then again, let's throw in the whole concept about building online. And these days, really, it doesn't kind of matter what genre you are. There's a lot of different ways of building. But I think especially if you're a live band and your goal and also what you love is touring and performing live, then touring is a big aspect of your career. And I think the most important thing is that you have a product to tour on. There are unique situations where bands or artists are known for their live performance but haven't put out a lot of recordings, but I think that's very unique and rare. There was one example where I can think of a friend of mine, Rain Wolf, who was known for his live performances, but also had performed for years. But I think he had, I don't know, maybe opened up for maybe Robert Plant and like a lot of other really big acts and had only put out like one live single or something like that. I think there's some unique situations like that, or people from other bands or have had some sort of prior career. But I do think it's substantial when a band is first building. There is a methodical way of going about it where you play live in your hometown and perform there just to kind of get your feet wet, whether you're an artist or band, and methodically build in your hometown and then regionally and then outward. But some of these things go kind of out of order. But, in terms of when an artist or band should start touring, I think when they have something out, really, because without your products or your music, you don't have anything to promote. So essentially, we're going back to the old school artist development perspective of you have your product and then you present it live.
Okay. So when we talk about where to tour, and you sort of touched on this about starting your hometown and then slowly building out, is that the kind of only way or the best way, or would you say that there are other ways that you might go about determining where might be a good place for you to start touring?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different factors. And I think, firstly, for an artist or band, I recommend that they figure out what their goals are because I'll give you, I guess, my example before the pandemic. In 2015, I started touring solo and full time for that matter. I just wanted to tour and play shows. My goal was building and touring. I think a lot of these things, when you tour, if you plan things out methodically, can happen simultaneously. Like you might be an artist and more of in a pop realm where you do a lot of marketing online or even radio campaigns, and then that'll help dictate where your fan base is and where you're getting played. So if you do a lot of marketing online and you have fans online in a lot of different cities, when I say markets, part of it is marketing. Hey, where should we play? Where should I play? And asking and talking to your audience and then letting that dictate where you tour to. Or if you're getting played on the radio, that can also methodically in a marketing sense help you dictate where you tour to. But I think typically for a band that's starting out, I think the most financially, way, and I don't think a lot of us get into the business to, the financial isn't the driving goal, it's a bonus, but it's not the driver. For the people who last in the music business, it's the passion or the love of doing it that drives you. And I think with that said, it's like finding a balance. Financially, if you're a 5-piece band, I think building in your hometown is probably smart. And then if everyone in your band has weekend jobs, weekday jobs, then it's being methodical about it and going on regional or weekend tours. So it's easy for people to take off on a Monday or Friday. And then you can do 3 or 4 markets and slowly build and keep circling around. Also, methodically, people will go about building where they play once a month or build into residencies in bigger cities, like playing once a week once you've built up an audience. I think stuff like that is more suitable to bigger bands or artists who travel in bigger parties or have like quite a big light show or expenses if they're hiring a lot of players to play. I think wiser to play hometown shows because you don't have to go far. Whereas once you get on the road, it's doing a lot of math where it's like, okay, how much, I guess on a do-it-yourself level, how much is it going to cost to go from city A to city B, for 5 hours? Do we have friends or family that we can stay with, or what are the costs of hotel? What's the cost that everybody's going to incur going on that? So that's why I think the whole strategy of starting small and then building outward is easier for artists and bands to wrap their heads around while building.
Okay. So a few things to think about there. And say that you are an independent artist and maybe you're a solo artist and you want to organize a tour that has a few different stops involved. How would you go about that process? Or are there some certain steps that are kind of the same in most tours that you go about planning?
I usually will distinguish reasoning by, especially, and I'll put the comparison out for, let's say, a band or artist for their first tour. First, maybe starting out where like they might have a connection to another band and some family and friends. I would substantially start kind of building with that, or doing major cities, doing a few. One thing that I also look for is, the methodicalness of the order of hitting cities, where you figure out what realistically, especially early on, your band or you can drive a day. What's reasonable? 5 or 6 hours is pretty reasonable, because if you're traveling with a bigger party and you tack on an additional hour, we're getting into a lot of logistics here. You tack on another hour for stopping and getting gas. And then also just methodically having enough time to load in, and do a sound check if the venue is offering that to you, or determining if it's a line check, how much time you have in between two cities. Also methodically thinking about in the investment, one strategy too, depending on where your band is at, is when you are planning a tour, doing the major markets, but playing, if you guys want to play in between, are smaller cities. And sometimes in these smaller cities that aren't oversaturated, bands and artists are able to negotiate like a guarantee, even for bands that are unknown. And sometimes that can help offset the tour costs when you're building these tours. I think it does require a little bit of like methodical math, planning out how much it'll cost you in gas for each drive, and then how much it'll cost you for staying in each city if you don't have a place to stay. And then you offset that if you're playing any cities in between that might offer a guarantee. Also, let me add, there's a couple things that might be helpful for people. There's a couple terms that bookers use. One is called a hold. And the term is used when you're figuring out kind of your routing. Often bands or agents will ask a venue if they can put a hold on a date, because they're trying to figure out if the next date is available in the next city, or they want to wait and just till they hear back from another venue. That is something that you can do. Also, it can help you figure out what routing you go. If, let's say, you've got 3 dates and you're talking to a venue on number 2, but you're waiting to hear back on number 3, and number 3 is in 2 different directions. So if you put date 2 on hold and wait till you hear back from 3, then it's kind of like just methodically thinking it out a little bit. But often too, the deals that people get these days for bands starting out are often door deals. It would be a percentage or an amount of money that people get from making at the door. And it depends on venues, or it would be a percentage at the bar. So that's also factors to think about. Some ticket prices are in advance and some are at the door, and those will vary.
Yeah, that's a great tip there, to think about some smaller towns on the way to maybe get that guaranteed fee as opposed to the percentage or per person through the door. And with these shows as well, is it often the band's responsibility to book the support act, and how would you go about doing that if so?
So that is a good question. I always had felt that when a band is coming to a city that they've never played before and are building, I've always felt like the booker, I feel like it is really a great thing. And I felt like almost it's their job in some way to help bands or artists initiate that connection. A good booker will be like really good at matching bands, like, okay, you're hard rock. I know 3 local bands that are hard rock. Let's see if they're available. Sometimes what happens too is, that's nice, is when you are used to touring and have quite a bit of experience, you end up building relationships with local bands, or you might have friends who are in bands in different cities, and you can go to a booker and just say, hey, we've got a couple locals we want to play with. Sometimes doing for bands, putting their shows together themselves ends up working out better, especially knowing their sound and style. These things really vary. Sometimes promoters and bookers really put it into the artists or band's hands to fill the entire bill. And I think that this can be really challenging and difficult for artists who are Not from a place, but that is part of the building and building the relationships with the cities and people in the cities. One way that I've gone about finding artists and bands is doing a lot of like Google searching on Facebook, searching on Instagram. Another technique is going to different venues in those cities and seeing what bands they are having there. Those can be some helpful things that you can do. I don't necessarily think that there's a rule in terms of whether the booker or the band puts together the entire bill, but I do really think it is nice if a booker offers to help at least, for a band that's starting out.
Yeah. And when we talk about marketing the tour as well, I know you mentioned before that can sort of almost determine the tour, as in where you end up getting played on a radio show or something like that. So maybe potentially that comes first and then the tour, but also then when you get to a point where it is a door deal and you do need to think about who is coming, what kind of strategies would you say you can use to market that tour?
So there's a lot. I mean, on the other hand, just to go back and circle back to my comment about the radio, is if you do enough planning in advance, it's like, and you have the budget, you could do, a radio campaign around the markets that you're playing. And that would help dictate some promotion, and also that would help. You could do ticket giveaways with the radio station. You could ask the venue. Often venues should have a local press list. I think press is also an aspect of letting the local news and media outlets know that you're coming. Sometimes these rules have varied, but like 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks in advance, shooting a pitch email or hiring out a publicist for that is helpful in doing tour press. That's something I've always done once I have a show booked in the past a lot. That can help because the day of or the week of, they might, put you in the paper, or there's also national press too, where they'll list all your tour dates. But just on the other aspect, I mean, through Facebook, if you list all the tour dates, personal messages is a great way to personally outreach to people. Like if your friends are from a town and start there, their friends will come and their friends might bring some other friends. Also ads, using the Instagram or TikTok ads to cater towards the cities that you're playing. If you list the tour dates and do a reel, I've messed with doing some of that stuff. Another thing is visually making like a poster or art for the tour online, but also physically that you can mail to the venue with the tour dates and a visual. Because I've had people, see stuff and come out. I think that's helpful. And there's other like marketing aspects, with like the press where you can do morning shows and stuff like that. But for a band who doesn't have many connections or any budget, I really feel like there's a lot of things you can do by just personally messaging people and posting and doing hashtags and asking people to share. So yeah, those are some tips to start.
Yeah, no, there's a few things that people can start with there. And when it comes to looking at your tour a little bit as a business, and I know you mentioned that's not why we get into it as artists, but do you have any tips for artists to, one, reduce their costs on tour, and secondly, to increase their income?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I mentioned was instead of spending money on a hotel or like, let's say you can look at Airbnb, but also another aspect, I'll just mention this, Priceline's great for hotels for bands who are starting out, Airbnb, but also if anyone in the band has friends where you can stay, that's a cut cost. Also, thinking about giving, they call this a per diem. Typically on bigger tours, it's like a one rate per day. Budgeting where you keep track of how much you're spending and, tell all the band members, hey, you know what? Here's some band money that we have, and we're each going to spend this amount a day on food. Also, a lot of these venues, depending on where you're playing, sometimes we'll offer food. That's a place to save money. Another way is that, everyone's sharing a vehicle. Some other ways to save money, I think planning ahead is really helpful so you can try and think about these things ahead of time. I think producing merch items for artists and bands, and that's why I say, kind of touring when you have a product, because selling CDs, t-shirts, and these physical items, although we're very much living in a digital world, having these physical items to sell on the road is really helpful. And this is a huge moneymaker. You can do exclusive like merch packages and stuff like that. I think that's a great way to do it, and also make it really easy, like with your merch display where people can look you guys up online, even make donations if they want. But I think those are some places to start. And another thing, like I'm mentioning, instead of, let's say you're playing Chicago, but you weren't able to get a show on your way back to New York, instead of driving that whole space, trying to play a smaller market that might give you a guarantee for playing, either one long set or maybe a couple sets, and figure out, if you're a flexible artist and you're just doing this alone without label support and people are still getting to know you, one thing that you could do is learn some covers or, be able to play some older songs or something like that so you can, play a couple sets for a good amount of money, and that'll help offset your tour.
Okay, some few more things to think about there as well. So all the things we've mentioned there, they could feel like a lot for an independent artist to think about, especially as someone, maybe even if they don't have a band, to reduce the number of things that need to be done per person. How realistic would you say it is for an artist to book their own tour?
I mean, I think it's extremely realistic. I think it's absolutely, you don't need to have a booking agent to do it at all. And in terms of a band or artist, knowing how to do booking is extremely valuable and effective. I can give a few recommendations on how to do that. If there's a market that I don't know and I'm looking for a venue, I might Google search rock venue, Edinburgh, Scotland, or, punk dive bars in Cincinnati, Ohio. I would also try searching, even on Instagram and Facebook. You can look on the hashtags or see where the bands that you like are playing, maybe who are, depending maybe a little bit above your band or the same level as your band. I often find that there are booking emails on their Facebook of venues. That's a helpful tip. Also their website. Sometimes you can call the venues. But yeah, I think it just takes time and searching. And if you're in a band with a few members, I think everybody learning how to delegate jobs could be very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. But that's great to hear that it is achievable and something that an artist can do for themselves. And are there any other tips that you want to add that maybe we haven't gotten to?
I definitely come from the train of thought, and I have always, is that if you build it, they will come. And thank the Field of Dreams for saying that. I feel like the more as an artist and band that you initiate and self-start for yourself in your career, the more it'll help. Don't be afraid to get out there. You don't need representation or a label or a booking agent to start, and just get out there. There's a lot that you can do on your own. And I think just to add, the music business in a certain realm is really built off of momentum, and really depending on what your goals are, the more you initiate, more momentum it causes. And then, a lot of people will take notice. So I think being a self-starter will really help you. Don't be afraid. I will definitely suggest, before it definitely was, 3 months in advance for booking a tour. Sometimes these things can be shorter or longer, 5 months, 6 months. I just think in general, planning there's no rule, but planning ahead is super important. You that way have enough time to try and get all your dates together, promote, and try and line up all these other things. I think it's very challenging and difficult when you're a month out. And also I recommend, having a product so your head is in a space of promotion versus finishing recording. It just makes things so much easier. Though we aren't living in a perfect world, music, it's a lot of like racing in some regards with the momentum. So, that's just one aspect to think about.
So, coming to our speed quiz, Vanessa, are you ready?
Oh my gosh, I'm nervous.
So, this is just 5 quick fire questions, and you just have to pick one or the other. So, let's go for it. Oceans or mountains?
Oh my gosh, I can't have both.
Oh no, that's not an option.
I want both. We're in the summer, so ocean.
Okay, all right, ocean. Roller coasters or water slides?
Oh wow, let's say roller coasters.
Okay. Headphones or speakers?
Oh wow, both are such great experiences. Let's say speakers. I want to share it with everybody.
Festival or rave?
Festival.
Mac or PC?
Mac.
Okay, very good. We kind of sped up a little bit there as we got to the end, and I thought that was good.
I felt more clear.
That's it. But no, that's great. So, coming to our top tips then, and you did mention a couple of these in the question before the quiz, but do you have one top career tip?
Yeah, I never really quite got this till I got it, but I remember people always saying, follow your heart. And I have felt like there were moments where I definitely got that, where being in the music business and just having a career or in life in general, pick something that you love because it'll really help, I think, the journey and make you, stick to what it is that you're doing. If you love music so much, but you have hard moments, it's not that hard because you love it. So I think no matter what, my tips and advice for artists and bands out there is put your heart into whatever you do and be super proud of your music and your performance and what you're giving to the world because it was such an opportunity to share something really beautiful. So, yeah.
I love that. And what is your one top self-care tip?
Personally, for my self-care, I do meditation. I listen to Chopra app almost every day, and I also exercise. I do hot yoga and ride my bike. So I feel like stuff like that is, I know it's simultaneously a couple things in one. Also, I will promote it, to each his own, but I am vegan and I think eating healthy, living a healthy lifestyle is very beneficial to the ups and downs of life.
Oh, 100%. No, I totally agree with you. It's so important to look after yourself, which includes your mental state and your physical state and everything that comes around that, because we can only deal with challenges if we're feeling strong. So yeah, no, that's great to think about. And the last question, what is your one top general life tip?
I've had moments where I have gone through brief overwhelm, and I think a lot of people went through different, everyone has a different threshold. But when I think about the fact that we're kind of like a piece of sand floating in space, it kind of makes me laugh. I'm like, oh my God, don't take anything too seriously. Because I do take seriously what I do. I put like everything I got in it and love what I do. But it's just a reminder, I think, 9 out of 10 times, everything's way better than you think. A lot less worse than you think. If you're going through a hard time, you can only go up. I think, at least for me, a positive outlook has always helped. And that's where like some stuff like meditation comes in and, just where your brain, head space is at. But just remember, live every moment, to life as much as you can, just because, we have this one chance in this body, depending on what you believe. And I used to always say this on tour, if you've been thinking about doing something in life, but you haven't done it yet, and you've been just waiting for someone to just give you an okay or tell you you can do it. Don't. Just go for it. Don't wait for another day and just live life to the fullest as much as you can.
Oh, yes. That's a great, great tip to end on, and very, very true. And like you were saying as well, things often are not as bad as we think sometimes, and even just putting things in perspective and having a bit of maybe a gratefulness practice as well, just being aware of all the good things that are happening as well is
Yeah, totally. It's like the cup half full instead of half empty. We're really lucky.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for that, Vanessa. And I learnt a lot about the touring aspect, especially as someone doing that for their first time. And I'm sure our audience will get a lot from it too. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Xylo. Thanks for having me.
My biggest 3 takeaways from Vanessa's episode was, firstly, small town shows in the middle of your bigger shows can be a great way to get a guaranteed fee instead of the larger shows that can often have a percentage of the door given to the artist. My second biggest takeaway was that you can put venue dates on hold, which can be a great way for you to plan the tour without booking things in until your whole tour is a bit more solidified. My last takeaway was that venues will often have PR lists that you can ask for and email those journalists to get some more buzz around your shows before getting to the tour dates. That's it from us this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.